Welcome to the award-winning Superhuman Academy podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to give you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we get started, I want to take a moment to talk to you guys about personal development. You see, if I've learned anything over the last 5 years of hosting this show, it's that the journey of self-improvement never ends. There's always a way to improve and grow. That's why my team and I have recently launched Superhuman Squad, an all-access pass to our full library of personal development courses. Think of it as the Netflix of personal development. For just $49 a month, you get access to each and every one of our premium courses, which sell for as much as $399 each. Best of all, you'll be the first to gain access to our new courses that we're developing in partnership with some of the most esteemed thought leaders we've ever hosted on the show. To get started, simply visit superhumanacademy.com. Greetings, Super Friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Superhuman Academy. Before we get started, I have to thank our friend Christian Yves from the United States of America, who said all the way back on July 2nd, all about me, 5 stars. This podcast gets me ideas on how to be a better me. Well, I'm really glad to hear that, Christian. Short and sweet review. We appreciate that. I'm happy to have any review, but the short and sweet ones are fantastic because it helps us get directly to the show. So if you haven't left a review yet, please do, and I will read it out on the air. On to today's episode. You guys, today we are joined by Kevin Stoller. He is the founder and CEO of a company called K12, which helps academic organizations better structure learning environments. So obviously, you know that he and I share that interest and passion about how we get people to learn more. He also runs the Better Learning podcast, which I recently had the great pleasure of being a guest on, where he talks about different ways that we can influence educational spaces, real-world tactics, improve education, and really, what is the future of education? I want to have Kevin on the show, not just because we both geek out about learning, but because I think he has some really, really interesting insights into what the future of education will look like. I don't think anyone is surprised when we say the model is not working and it is going to be disrupted. But what does that mean for us? What does that mean for the children in our lives? How can we help create this revolution in education? And also, how can we improve our own learning based on what experts like Kevin are discovering in their day-to-day work? So really interesting episode, a little bit different than our usual, but I know that because it has to do with learning, you guys are gonna love it. So without any further ado, my new super friend, Kevin Stoller. Mr. Kevin Stoller, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Really good. I'm really excited to have you here because we are going to talk about a topic that you and I are both quite passionate about, which is education.
Absolutely. It's amazing how much things have changed and really need to change. So I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Absolutely. So Kevin, for those who haven't had the pleasure of being on your podcast and getting to know you as I have, tell us your superhuman origin story.
Mine's similar to entrepreneurs, but where it's dissimilar is the fact that I've kind of got more involved with education through my entrepreneurship. And I was one of those people that always knew I wanted to start something of my own. Just I was okay getting by in school, but wasn't really passionate about anything in there. And just would always kind of come up with all these business ideas, and probably came up with about 100 different business ideas, like where I had actually written out business plans. And every time I'd get into them, I'd be like, no, this just really isn't a very good one. And then worked for a couple of Fortune 500 companies and broke away and said, like, you know what, I got to at least work for a smaller company to try to get me closer to this entrepreneurship. And met with my future business partner for 6 months. We would meet at a bagel shop for an hour and a half before we would start our day. So we'd meet at 5 a.m. and go and start business planning. And then I was getting those same feelings. I'm like, this just is not a good business plan. And he looked at me in his eyes. He said, well, I'm doing it whether you're in or not. And literally from that moment is when I was an entrepreneur 100%. Like, well, if you're doing it, I'm in. I'm 100% in. And the business that we were getting into was actually selling school furniture. And, by all means, I can still look back and be like, that was not a very good business plan idea to go into this. But it's definitely what has driven a lot of things of when we realized how much that a simple thing like furniture and the environment affects how a student learns. And that was really when my turning point went from being an entrepreneur to almost like an educational advocate.
Wow. Now, was there something in your past that led you to resonate so much with education? For example, in my story, I struggled so much to learn. And that's why when I finally had the opportunity to help other people learn more effectively, it was like, yes, I'm going to end or try to end so much of this suffering that I experienced. Did you have any kind of early influence or something that touched your life that made you say, hey, we got to fix this thing?
Yeah, and maybe that's where it's a little different. I was very good at getting by with very little effort.
I envy you.
I don't know why that is. And I think it may just be that for some reason, I'm good at taking tests, which is actually one of the things that I'm really big in, is recognizing that these tests are really what's kind of wrong with education right now. Is that if you're good at taking tests, it usually translates to decent grades. And then there's a little bit of what's helped me as an entrepreneur of kind of finding the straightest path to the goal of where you want to get to. And I recognize that if, at the high school level, that if I can take accelerated and AP classes and get B's and C's in that, it actually counts. Like my school had weighted GPAs. So by kind of slacking and getting a B and C in a class, it actually counted as like an A or even above an A in taking a non-accelerated AP class. So it was little things like that. Now I'm recognizing as my kids are getting older and one of my kids has been diagnosed with dyslexia, that I have a lot of the same characteristics to that. I don't know if I would have been, tested and actually classified with dyslexia or not, but those things actually correlate really well. And now I'm recognizing as an adult that I learn very differently than other people. And that's actually been one of the things that, in education has come along to that. And why I want to help other people with that is dyslexia in particular is proportionally, there's two different career paths that you're more likely to have dyslexia with. First one is entrepreneurship. And guess what the second one is?
Athletics.
Criminal. Prisoner.
Really?
There's a very high percentage of prisoners that more than the average. It's something like 40% of prisoners have a form of dyslexia.
Oh my goodness.
And it's all it is. A lot of times people with dyslexia have a very high IQ, and it's kind of termed this double exception, or I'm not coming up with the right term on here of what it's actually called, but it's because their minds don't think the same way and they don't recognize things. So they tend to memorize instead of learning how to decode the words and comprehend them. So, and if you think about it, at the very young age, when you're a slow reader, you're immediately really labeled as that you're not very smart and you're dumb. And the reality is that they are very skilled and other things come very naturally to them. But since reading is such a highly valued skill, that it really sets the foundation off in the wrong direction.
Incredible. So tell me about your journey towards improving education. I mean, I guess I'll start with the very broad question, because I know you work with so many schools, principals, educators through your podcast, but also through your company. What's wrong with our education system from your perspective? Where do we have to improve?
Yeah, and that's what I'm really excited to talk to your audience about here, is that I used to believe that the answer was that the goal, if you ask most parents, most teachers, most students, the goal of K through 12 education is to get into a good college. And I felt like that was really what was wrong with it, because if you really break down what are the steps to get into a good college, it is so much about testing and so much about trying to create this kind of this resume to get into a good college. And if you really look at that, like, a good college probably is not the right goal for your education. It's not setting the right foundation. If we're teaching our kids right now to get very good at test taking, because that's the biggest thing that's going to contribute to them to getting into a good college, is we're not setting them up for the world that is coming upon us. There's a stat out there right now that 85% of the jobs that will exist when current kindergartners graduate from school do not exist right now.
Yep.
So if we are setting up for kind of the world that it's used to be, we are failing. And to me, there's such an urgency to this problem. It's hard because the education system, it is a system. There are so many interconnected things that make this a very convoluted and difficult thing to change. But there's got to be some urgency to it, because it's amazing how fast that kids go through there. And it's the same system that's been set up 120 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So really broad question here. I do want to get into, how people can learn better through environmental design and all the things that you talk about. But what can we as listeners, whether or not we're parents, whether or not we're teachers, what can we do to improve education? It does seem like this, like you said, this system that's really hard to penetrate. I mean, even if you've written books about improving learning, it just seems so hard to actually penetrate this system.
Yeah, this is the topic I want to really dig into. So I used to think that it used to be the goal of the college system in doing that. I firmly believe that the higher education system is going to crumble, or it's going to look vastly different, and it's going to happen very, very fast. If you just look at how expensive it is and how much debt people are coming on. And again, it's always the adults that really created this problem. It's not the kids. And if the parents, and I feel like there is definitely kind of this wave, there was a recent college scandal of a lot of these celebrities and things were basically bribing their kids into these schools. And I think there's just a few things that's going to happen that's going to drastically change how things are viewed. And I think this is where us as the adults in the professional world really have a much bigger role than we realize. And it's just kind of coming into view for me in the last year. In that, if you look at if anyone who's your listener has any type of hiring role, it's really on us. Because look at how much emphasis that we put on the college education. And if we can change our mindset, and since we're moving into more of like a freelance society anyway, and if we can look instead of what's your degree, and even making that prerequisite of saying like you can't apply for this job unless you have a 4-year degree, we're the ones that are really causing the problem. It's the employers. So anyone, whether it's a hiring manager, an entrepreneur, we're the ones that are sitting here putting all the value on making sure that somebody goes through that system. But in turn, we are all saying we want people who are more entrepreneurial and out of the box mentality thinking. But if we're putting all this emphasis on hiring people because they're great at staying in the box and following the rules and following the steps that everyone told them to do as a kid, we're the ones that are actually causing this problem.
Right.
If you immediately take that out and say, I want to hire you based on your merit and based on what your work ethic is and what the products that you've already produced, whether it's, a web designer or somebody who's very good at investing or whatever your skill set is, and we start hiring based on that, not based on what your GPA was and how well you did, getting into a college or what club that you joined or, just building up your resume. And I think that's where I feel like the tipping point can happen very quick. And we're seeing it. I mean, we're seeing the way a lot of people get on, like some of the Upwork and, different types of freelance type of jobs where we're hiring people based on their merits on there when you're doing it as a freelance. But for some reason, when we're hiring full-time employees, we still are so stuck on making sure that they have that college degree.
Yeah. And, it's so interesting what you say, because I just had lunch an hour and a half ago with someone who kind of dropped out of high school at 14 and a half, did all the GED stuff just to have it on his resume, and then went about, faking it till he made it, learning from different startups, joining different startup teams, building out his resume. And now, he's a 6-figure consultant to startups on product and team management and stuff like that. This guy not only doesn't have a degree, he didn't stick through high school. And this is exactly what's happening is people are learning on the job in the private sector, and that changes everything. I mean, I don't think there's a degree yet in what he's doing. And so if you held people up to that metric, you'd never find someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a really interesting study that was done, and actually Malcolm Gladwell on his podcast did a really good job breaking it down. So I'd recommend your listeners go back and try to find this one. So what Malcolm Gladwell did was he went into and tried to understand for lawyers of who are the best lawyers and how do they come about. And it was looking at this and saying, like, most people are hiring off of if they went to one of the top 10 law schools, then they are considered, well, they must be really smart. But those testing they got on there was all about speed. You had to be able to very quickly be able to read and comprehend and do and answer the questions correctly. And that was the biggest determinant of that. And then there was actually a consulting group that their job was to break down and hire the best lawyers for these law firms. And they kind of had like a Moneyball baseball approach to it, where they were looking at all these different things and studying who were the best lawyers. And it turns out that the best lawyers are actually the ones who are very detailed, very slow and methodical about their work, which was the total opposite of this is what would prevent them from getting into one of the top 10 law schools. So they actually looked at it and said, like, what is one of the biggest determinant of if you're going to be successful as a lawyer? And they found out that the law school you went to, it was a total coin flip. It did not matter which law school you went to. But one of the biggest things was when you were younger, if you had some type of blue collar job, that was one of those factors that really made you rise to the top of being able to be a lawyer. I mean, your story of those people who have these alternate routes of getting there, they're almost always more interesting and have a better work ethic than the ones that are very good at school.
Right. So one of my big takeaways here, which is, by the way, something that I do, is hire people not for their degree, hire them for their merits and their skills. What about the kids in our lives? I mean, is the message then, hey, it's okay if you don't go to college? Or how do we, because we all have nieces, nephews, sons, daughters, little cousins. I mean, how do we help the next generation of superhumans?
Yep. And again, this is an adult problem. There's not a kindergartner that's out there that's saying, I want to go to a college. Like, we're the ones that are ingraining that into the kids. This is an adult problem. This is where we need to decide how much value is there in college. And if you really kind of break down the societal reasons of why we think college matters, it does come down to most people think that you can't get a good job unless you go to college. So we're in this catch-22 scenario where the adults need to recognize that, no, we need to teach our kids how to learn. We need to teach them how to work hard. We need to teach them how to learn. We need to be able to set them up to do that. If college ends up being the track, because there are a lot of things that you need to go to college. You need to go to med school if you want to be a doctor for some of these things. But there's also, for this general education, the kids don't know what they want to do. And we're forcing them into this and saying you're not successful. But if you really look at this, and I'm not going to say this for everyone because I don't like making total blanket statements about it, but a lot of times it's the parent's ego that's forcing this idea that my kid needs to go to college and my kid needs to go to a good college, because there's this ego that comes with it. Be like, if my kid, does not go to college, or my kid really has a fascination to be a plumber, or somebody who's working on HVAC on air conditioners, that we view that as not successful. But the reality is that those professions pay really well. It's a really good profession. There's a big shortage on those things, and there's nothing wrong with it. And, if somebody goes in and they learn how to be a plumber, and then they say, hey, no, I really want to do something else, we should make it a lot easier for that to happen, for people to be able to just take courses or do on-job learning to do those things instead of saying, no, you have to go to college and walk away with $125,000 in debt. It's a broken system.
I love that. All right, at this point, I want to pause and take a moment to thank our sponsor, Four Sigmatic, who is making it easy for everyday people to unlock the incredible health benefits of mushrooms. I originally learned about Four Sigmatic when I met their founder at a conference in 2015, and I have been pretty much obsessed with their products ever since. Personally, I use their reishi mushroom tea most nights for an all-natural sleep aid. I carry their chaga immunity blend anytime I travel. And I've also pretty much switched out my usual coffee or yerba mate for their unbelievably awesome mushroom coffee, either in ground or in instant form. Now, what I love about the mushroom coffee is that it combines chaga for immune support with lion's mane for intense focus. And because of that, I actually find it to be more effective than most nootropics or stimulants, including Ritalin, despite having only 40 milligrams of caffeine. It's honestly insane. If you haven't tried out their products, I strongly recommend you do so. And to encourage you to give them a try, we've actually teamed up with Four Sigmatic to bring you an incredible 15% discount. To take advantage of that, just visit foursigmatic.com/superhuman today. All right, back to the show. One of the ideas that I had before getting into this is I recognized this, and I saw that in my last company, some of the best people that I'd hired, didn't have degrees. For example, I had an amazing software developer who trained himself. And I thought, if we could just come up with some kind of testing company where all we did was test people and assess whether or not they have the skills autodidactically, then we could, basically be the Colby for skills, and companies would just pay us hundreds of dollars to assess candidates, because really, what are they using a diploma for other than to say, okay, this guy, studied EECS at Berkeley. He probably knows his way around electrical engineering. We never really did anything with the idea, but I love that that's the consensus on where we're going.
I wouldn't say it's the consensus.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's definitely why I'm so passionate that I think it can happen really quick. And I'll just going to use one more example of why I think it can happen quicker than most people do, especially in the education market. If you go and you talk to people right now, if you go talk to a principal of a middle school, they don't think this. They are still very much preparing kids for college. And that's because that's what the parents are demanding of the schools. It is coming from the parents saying that my kid needs to go to a good college. So you start even thinking about it, you hear the comment a lot of grades really start mattering by 7th or 8th grade. So, people are going to look at this. It ends up on your record and there is a huge, and we're really putting a lot of really undue anxiety onto our kids to really force them into this path. But coming back to why I think it's going to happen quickly is, if you really look at what kids want to, when you're at 18 years old, you just really want to be surrounded by more people that are 18 years old. And that's what's really appealing to kids of why they want to go to college. And I'm watching what's happening in the workplace and what's happening in these co-working spaces.
Bingo.
If you look at the WeWorks and all those things. And I think what's going to happen is there's going to be things, and there's early signs of this happening around the US at least, that there are going to be just communities where people, instead of paying all this money to go to college, you're just really just paying to live on a campus for young people.
Yep.
And they're doing work, they're taking courses online, but they may not be taking courses all from the same school. And I think once you start doing that, you just get kind of this environment of young people all kind of living and collaborating together. In some ways, it could be kind of scary socially, but I think developmentally, that's what they're craving. And if they can just work on their passions, I think what's going to happen is going to be more of a push towards these certificates where you take classes to learn things that you want to learn, and that furthers, the career and the jobs that are important to them. And so you may have all these people living together, but they may be taking online courses from, 100 different universities or working on jobs. And they may be, hopefully even making money when they're doing this because they're doing freelance work while they're doing that. All they want to do is they want to live and they want to be around each other and they want to have really easy meals and easy transportation.
I love that idea.
Somebody's going to do this and somebody's going to do it at a bigger scale and be like, instead of paying all this money to go to college that's really limited to only the courses that they offer and only the professors that are on that campus, there's going to be a whole bunch of these types of environments popping up.
I love that. And there are, two different Israeli companies. One, WeWork, which most people don't realize is an Israeli company.
Oh, I did not know that at all.
Is doing this with their We Live and We Learn initiative. So it's like you live in a building with other people, kind of communal living. They have a We Learn campus. I always say they're going to have like a We Everything, including something I can't say on the air, but they're going to open up brothels. They're going to open up gyms like We Sweat. We, you know what. Anyway, so that's one. And another one is Jolt. Pretty well-known Israeli entrepreneur Don Deutsch is doing. I think it's Don Deutsch. I might have his name wrong. In any case, they are building these campuses where classes are taught in person and you show up. So it's not an online learning experience. Sometimes it's broadcast, actually, and it's broadcast learning, but you're in a classroom, you're in a community, you have a subscription program. Roy Deutsch is the guy's name. You have this kind of subscription program and that's how you kind of show up and learn. Exactly as you said, and then you get kind of a certificate.
Absolutely, yeah. Which in turn, I know we're talking a lot about this, but that's what those learning environments that what we get into is that's what we are trying to be the advocates for. And, right now there are a lot of schools that are taking this on and realizing, hey, we're preparing students more for a freelance society. And instead of having everyone sit in straight rows looking at the teacher and saying you can't move, you just have to, take in the information, memorize it and do it on tests. We are seeing a lot of focus on schools now recognizing this and trying to create more collaborative type of learning environments where we are allowing students to learn what more in line with their dominant learning styles instead of just, telling them to sit still and, let this information come in. Most people learn better by actually doing things and being able to really get involved and being able to create different areas, whether you're better at more of a tactile learner or you're better at a visual learner, being able to have different environments that allow students to naturally do that instead of trying to force them all into one bucket.
Really cool. Now that's actually a really great segue. My background is accelerated learning. So much of my audience is passionate about understanding how they can learn better. You have so much experience with academic environments. How can we set ourselves up to learn better?
Yeah. As adults, I think adults are mostly figuring it out for themselves. Hopefully they're in a work environment where they can have kind of those multiple choice. We call it student choice in the student environment of saying like, okay, pick where you're most comfortable. And that doesn't mean that you have to pick it for 100% of the time, and we're seeing it in the workplace, whether, like definitely in like the co-working spaces, but we're also seeing it in the corporate environment where we don't expect people to sit in one desk and just be there all the time. We're creating different breakout areas. We're creating more casual spaces and we're creating places where if you need just some alone time for a little bit and being able to recognize yourself of where you get the most energy, where you're most productive, what times a day that you have these different types of things where you may be more creative in the morning and in the afternoon is really good for just more of the monotonous types of things that you need to be doing or vice versa. So it's recognizing how much that environment impacts you and what your natural tendencies are to be able to adjust to that. And it's energizing once you find it. So I always just recommend people like try things and test it out. Say like this week, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to change something. I'm going to work standing when I need to stand. I'm going to have conversations, meetings where I'm walking together or we're walking versus sitting together and just trying to really change that and be able to look at it and see, did that affect it at all? Or am I more energized one way or am I more productive in one way? And this is what we're trying to teach the students right now and allow the teachers to give the students that ability, that flexibility to find their own learning environments and not have to just tell them to sit still and don't move because it distracts me when I'm giving a lecture to you.
Very, very cool. I want to transition a little bit and ask you about some of your own superhuman habits and techniques. What are some of the things you do to perform at your absolute best?
It's taken me a while to get to those things, but I really drive home the one thing that I've done my entire career based on one of my first jobs. I asked someone who was successful, I'm like, what do you recommend do? And it is still very simple. It's something I've consistently done for over 20 years now. It's just, I do not end my workday without scheduling what I do the next day, planning my day for the next day.
Love that.
And it's just such a simple thing. I've expanded on it now where I do it more on a weekly, and I'm very good at just kind of setting the high goals, because it's just amazing how if you don't do that, you can immediately just, start your workday, open your email, and become reactive for the entire day.
Yes.
And it's just one super simple thing of just like before you end your day, plan your day and just say, these are the 3 big things I need to do tomorrow. And when you start your days, I hit those 3 things first, and then, and I've recognized that there's a book by Daniel Pink that talks about timing and recognizing the time of day. I am not very productive in the afternoon. So I've recognized I got to get my big things done in the morning. So that's what I do.
I love that. And it's such an important one because it's all about, fitting in those big rocks before you put in the pebbles in the sand. And we all fall prey to it. I mean, I teach some of this in a couple of my courses, but sometimes we fall prey to it. So one of the ways that I've sorted that is by really only allowing myself to do those pebble activities like emails on Mondays and Thursdays. And then I'm, staring at the keyboard the other days with nothing to do besides the big things that I'm really supposed to be doing.
For sure. Yep. And another thing, are you familiar with the book Traction or the EOS system?
Yeah, I'm actually reading Traction right now.
That was one of the most transformative things for our company. We've been doing that for almost 4 years now. And your pebbles and rocks analogy is a big core to that. Like every quarter, everyone, the company and every individual has rocks. Those are the 3 or 4 biggest things that they need to accomplish. And that system, the whole EOS system, it turned us into like an organization all working in the same direction. So I'm a huge, huge advocate for that system. And there's others like that, but it's just picking some system and doing that. And, and I would love to see this, coming back to my education side, I'd love to see similar things being instituted within schools to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that's actually a good segue to the next question I wanted to ask, which is, what are some other books that have changed your life?
Yeah, that's definitely one of them on there. The other one, like just kind of looking back through my career, there were a couple books, but Millionaire Mind and The Millionaire Next Door. Those were the ones that kind of opened my eyes early on because like I said, I was a good test taker. I went to colleges. I could, have a master's degree, and I started working for Fortune 500 companies. I was on that track, and I found these books. And what they did is they studied people with higher than average net worth. And they really looked at what are the things that did that. And it turns out that it was usually not about their schooling. It was more about making life choices and making career choices that were kind of counterintuitive. And for me, it was one of the things that kind of confirmed it was a lot of business owners that did that. And it was usually in like dirty industries, things that other people didn't want to do. And, you get into, and I've seen it, happen a lot too, like people that, are like own garbage companies, they're doing those types of things, and they have like, the porta-johns, and they're renting out porta-johns. Those are like the dirty industries. So that's why I've kind of, had a fascination with some of those things that they may seem kind of mundane. They're not the big things that change the world, but there really is a big impact on that. And being able to kind of incorporate the social good with our entrepreneurship too has been really fascinating to me. So some of those books had kind of early influence on me, but the Traction series has really had a big impact on the company.
Awesome. I'm really glad to hear that because, I read Rocket Fuel and now I'm getting into Traction. I need to make more time for it.
Yeah. There's one more book that you think about it too. It's a book that's it's not as popular, but it's a book called The End of Average. And Todd Rose, who's the author of this, studied a lot of the same things we're talking about here of how everyone's so focused on the average. And the story behind this is that when the U.S. Air Force was trying to study how to design their fighter jets for the pilots to be able to react to everything much quicker, like in a split second, because it's a matter of life or death if they can reach things in there. So they were trying to design it for the average body of their pilots. So they studied their 2,000 pilots that they had, and they took measurements of different parts of their body. And so they would measure, like their forearm and, from their knee down, and then they would average it. So they took the averages, and once they took the average of all the 2,000 pilots, there was not one pilot within one standard deviation that was the average of all these different components of their body. So they recognize, like, if we design this for the average, we're designing it for no one. And that's actually what came about of what we have in cars now, of all the adjustable seats and adjustable steering wheel and things like that came from that study. But we really think about it, how we apply it to everything else, to medicine and to everything else that we're doing right now, is that we're designing everything for the average. And when we do that, we're designing it for no one.
Right.
So for education, that's where we need to be designing this for the individual instead of saying the average, because really everyone wants our kid to be just like everyone else, but just a little better. That's really the flaw that we're doing that. And I'm excited to see what's going to happen, because I do think there's so much that can change very quickly.
I like that. And yeah, about averages, I had a professor in managerial accounting at INSEAD who said, if you put one foot in a bucket of ice water and another foot in a bucket of boiling water, on average, that's a nice temperature bath. Averages lie. So
that's right.
Really great.
Yep.
Well, Kevin, I know we are running out of time here. I do want to ask, how can people reach out, get in touch with you, learn more about everything that you're doing?
Yeah, our website is K12. So if you're interested on the education side, it's KAY-12 spelled out, TWELVE.com. Individually, the only social media that I'm kind of involved in is LinkedIn. If you want to search Kevin Stoller on LinkedIn and connect with me that way, that would be a great place. If you are interested at this, in the level, we did write a book about it called Creating Better Learning Environments. And then I also do a podcast called Better Learning, which we try to look at kind of the innovation and be some of the ones that are trying to change this culture in education. So the Better Learning podcast, I try to get some really fascinating people on that are really looking and doing things differently than the traditional way of education.
Love that. Love that. And last question before I let you go here, Kevin. If people take away one big message from this podcast and they carry it with them for the rest of their lives, what would you hope for that to be?
That our choices as adults affect the kids. We always want to talk about, like if people have issues with the millennial generation, don't blame the millennials, blame their parents. They're formed that way because that's the way we taught them to act. And as millennials and as kind of the younger generation comes, we have the choice. And that's why I think it's going to happen pretty quickly. The millennials that have gone through this education process, they know where they're at, and they're recognizing what they liked and what they didn't like about their childhood. And so I do think this is going to happen quickly. So my takeaway, and the thing that if you can do is think about your choices of what you do really does affect everyone that comes after you. So the more we can realize that it's not about us and our choices affect other things, there's just so much good that comes from when being able to help others. And it comes from our everyday actions and our everyday things that we do. Mm-hmm. And, and now as a parent, I see how much, my kids are influenced by that. And, our choices as hiring managers and as entrepreneurs right now is that if we can hire people based on their merits and not based on, what their grades are and how good they are at staying in the box, that's what's going to change things for the future.
Love that. That's a great note to end on. Kevin Stoller, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been such a pleasure to chat again, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Great. Thank you. Keep up good work.
Back at you. Talk soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the award-winning Superhuman Academy podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit superhuman.blog. While you're at it, please take a moment to share this episode with a friend and leave us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next week.